The drawer was already open when I unlocked the office door. I stood in the frame for a moment, key still in hand, going over whether I had left it that way. I had not. I was certain of it the way I was certain of most things at Velketh, not because I was meticulous by temperament, though I was, but because the cartography office was the kind of room where you noticed what you had left behind. The flat file drawers held the originals, survey prints, terrain overlays, settlement boundary maps going back 30 years to when Velketh had been nothing but basalt and wind, and a transit beacon somebody had anchored to the rock. I knew where everything sat. I knew which drawer I had opened last, and which one I had bumped with my knee on the way out at 16th Bell the evening before. I had not opened drawer 7 from the bottom on the left bank. It was the one that stuck. Someone had forced it. I set my kit on the counter and turned on the overhead light, and that was when I saw her. She was standing at the far end of the flat file cabinet, both hands braced on the lip of drawer 9, peering down into it with the focused attention of someone reading a document in a language they mostly understood. She was small, waist-high, perhaps, if I were standing beside her, which I was not yet. Pale gray-green skin, the color of river clay in the early morning before the sun gets at it properly. Ears that came to soft points at the top. Faint markings along her throat, a tracery of bioluminescence that pulsed very slowly in the moment before the overhead light caught up, like something underwater, like the slow, visible rhythm of breathing seen from outside the body. Large, dark eyes. She had short hair, or what would have been short hair if it had not been standing out in several directions at once, as though she had recently been somewhere windy, which, given that it was 3rd Bell and the outer corridor on level 3 ran cold at that hour, she probably had. She did not look up when the light came on. "This one is not right either," she said. Her standard was flat and careful, the kind you learn from a text rather than from people. Each word placed deliberately, like stepping stones across a gap you are not yet certain will hold you. I looked at the map she was examining. It was a terrain survey of the Kelveth southern approach, dated 2 cycles back. Contour lines, drainage markers, a note in the margin about the eastern ridge being replotted after a minor subsidence event. Not a settlement survey at all, technical infrastructure mapping, the kind of thing that interested maybe 4 people at this station, and none of them at 3rd Bell. "What are you looking for?" I asked. She looked up then. She assessed me the way you assess a variable that has entered your equation uninvited, not with alarm, just with the practical need to account for it before continuing. "The right one," she said, and went back to the map. I had been a compact Class II cartography technician for 11 years at that point. 9 of those years spent at transit relay stations of various sizes and temperatures. Velketh was the 4th, and by some measures the least comfortable, but it had good equipment and a clean flat file system, and nobody bothered me much. In 11 years I had met children in corridors before. I had returned lost ones to confused parents in transit waiting areas. I had redirected small ones to food services when they had wandered away from their families, and found themselves standing outside my office with the look of someone who had expected to arrive somewhere else. I had never met one conducting what appeared to be an independent systematic review of a locked filing cabinet at 3rd Bell in the morning. I pulled a stool from under the counter and sat down at a distance I judged to be non-threatening. I put it at about 4 meters. "How did you get in?" I said. She considered the question for a moment, weighing whether it was asked in the spirit of security enforcement or simple curiosity. "The lock is the same kind as the supply room on level 2, she said. "The supply room has the same model as the transit waiting area. The transit waiting area lock has a worn secondary tumbler. If you apply pressure to the upper left corner of the faceplate while turning the key, it opens without the key." I looked at my door, I looked at her. I said, "That's a significant observation for a child who has been here." I checked the time on my board, then the door log I had not thought to look at before. 2 hours. 2 hours and 14 minutes, she said. I arrived when the shift rotation happened. The corridor was busy. No one noticed me. I turned the information over. She had not said no one noticed me as though it was a boast. She had said it as a statement of environmental conditions that had favored her approach, like a navigator noting that the current was running in their direction. I did not ask whether she had noticed that what she was doing was unauthorized. I had the strong impression that she had noticed, evaluated it carefully against her priorities, and placed it lower on the list. "What settlement are you looking for?" I said, because that was what you looked for in the flat files at Velketh. Settlement surveys. People came through this station going somewhere, and sometimes, often in my experience, what they needed before they could believe they were truly going there was to see it drawn on paper. Real contour lines, a named river, roads. The drawn version of a place made it solid in a way that words and transit documents did not. She looked at me again, more carefully this time, weighing this question differently from the last one, I thought. "My mother described it," she said. "There is a river. It runs from a high plateau through a canyon to a flat delta at the coast. At the delta there are dye vats, root dye," she said. "The settlement grows along the east bank of the lower canyon. The buildings are pale stone," she said. "There is a bridge at the canyon's mouth." She said all of this as though she were reciting it, as though she had been asked to remember it in a specific order, and she had done that, and she was giving it back precisely. I went to the index cabinet, separate from the flat files, combination lock, which she had apparently not attempted, and ran my finger down the settlement survey register. It took me 4 minutes. She watched without commenting, which I took as patience rather than indifference, because she watched the way someone watches who is tracking your method and deciding whether it is correct, not the way someone watches who has given up on the outcome. "Vethsorel," I said. "Eastern Canyon Settlement. Population 1,200, Class 3 compact resettlement site, River Delta border. Established 14 years ago." I found the survey slot and pulled the flat file copy, a full format print, 2 meters by 1 when unfolded, with elevation insets and a separate drainage overlay. "This one." She crossed to me in about 4 steps and looked at it. She looked at it the way she had been looking at all the others, with the same methodical focus. But about 30 seconds in, something changed. It was not dramatic. Her hands, which had been at her sides, came up, and she put one finger on the bend in the river where the canyon widened to the approach of the delta, and she traced it slowly along the contour to the edge of the main sheet where the delta survey began. She stopped with her finger on the delta. She did not say anything for a long moment. "Yes," she said, then more quietly, "that is the right one." I stood with the survey in my hands, or rather I was already setting it down on the flat file cabinet, because she clearly needed it in front of her and not held by me. And I watched a child I had never met confirm, to her own satisfaction, that the place her mother had described to her in a transit waiting room was real, and had been drawn on a map. I did not know what to say that would be proportionate to that particular moment. "You can come back tomorrow," I said finally. "During the day cycle, the office opens at 6th bell." She considered this. "I will have to leave before my mother wakes." "6th bell is before most people wake at the station," I said. She did the arithmetic. "All right," she said. She set drawer 9 back in place. She did it carefully, fitting it squarely in the frame so the stuck edge didn't bind. She straightened the 2 or 3 surveys she had moved during her review. She set the Vethsorel survey flat on top of the cabinet rather than returning it to the index slot, which I took to mean she intended to continue studying it. Then she walked out of the office at 3rd bell in the morning without looking back, transit coat slightly too large at the shoulders, her footsteps precise and even on the cold floor. I stood in the office with the overhead light on and the drawer that stuck slightly open, and I did not immediately understand what had just happened to me. Her name was Miv. I learned this the next morning at 6th bell, when she arrived 7 minutes before I did, and was sitting on the floor outside the office door with her back against the wall, and a folded piece of what appeared to be transit documentation paper in her lap, on which she had drawn a fairly accurate contour sketch of something from memory. She had no drawing tools with her that I could see. She had used the edge of her thumbnail and the grain of the paper, scoring lines into the surface. "What are you drawing?" I said, unlocking the door. "The approach corridor on level 3, she said, standing and tucking the paper into the inner pocket of her vest. "There is a support column that does not match the station schematics. I looked at the public schematics posted in the transit waiting area. The column is not on them. I think it was added after the original construction phase." I turned the key and let us both in. "Probably. Stations like this one get modified over time. Supplemental structural work, additional bracing, load redistribution after equipment additions. The original build schematics don't always get updated when they add things." "That is a problem," she said. She sat down at the secondary work table, not my table, not the equipment benches. The secondary one, which I used for reference materials and occasionally for my midday meal, with the ease of someone who had already decided where she would sit and was simply executing the decision. If there is ever a pressure event in Section D and someone is navigating by the posted schematics, they will not know the column is there. I looked at her for a moment. "I will file a notation with the station engineering office," I said. "Good," she said, and turned her attention to the Veth-Sorrel survey, which was where she had left it on top of the flat file cabinet, and which she apparently noted was still there, and went to look at first thing, standing at the cabinet with her chin just above the level of the survey's edge. I put my kit on my desk. I turned on the systems. I ran the morning calibration on the survey overlay equipment, which took about 12 minutes and required only occasional attention. I was on the 4th calibration pass when I said, without turning around, "Your mother, what is she doing while you're here?" "Waiting," Miv said. I turned then. She was looking at the Veth-Sorrel survey's delta section, one finger hovering above it without touching, the way you hover above something you have already memorized and are now simply verifying. "Waiting for what?" I said. She told me about the biometric re-verification hold. She told it the way she told everything, methodically, in order, without inflection that might suggest she was asking for sympathy rather than conveying factual information. Her mother, Sale, was a Sevrathi resettlement applicant with a Class 1 transit clearance. They had arrived at Velketh 16 days ago as part of a group transfer from a provisional staging platform 3 systems out from here, in a direction that the Compact's transit maps labeled as edge of range, but that people who had actually been there described as simply cold and badly maintained. The biometric scan at intake had flagged Sale's left palm print as a non-match against the transit authorization file. A re-verification had been requested. The re-verification had produced a slightly different reading from the intake scan, which had triggered an automatic escalation to the Compact Relocation Authority's regional review queue. The review queue had an estimated processing time of 12 to 21 working days. At Velketh's current staffing level, Miv said, the waiting area consensus, which she had apparently been gathering with the same systematic attention she applied to everything else, was that it ran closer to 21. The problem was the transit clearance window. The one that assigned them a resettlement slot at Veth-Sorrel was valid for 30 days from arrival. 16 days had already passed. 14 remained. If the re-verification was not resolved in those 14 days, the transit clearance would lapse. Lapsed clearances went back into the general resettlement pool. Veth-Sorrel had a current waiting list of 42 applicant families. There was no guarantee of the same slot, and no guarantee of any comparable slot within a reasonable time frame. The default outcome for families whose clearance lapsed at Velketh, according to the current station guidance posted in the Level 5 Relocation Authority office, was reclassification to a provisional holding station 2 systems in the wrong direction, pending requeuing. Miv said all of this in precisely that order. Then she said, "My mother has filed 3 inquiries with the Relocation Authority office on Level 5. 2 have received automated acknowledgement messages. 1 has not received any response." I had turned fully in my chair. I was looking at her. She was still looking at the survey, but her hand was flat on it now, not hovering. "How do you know all of this?" I said. "My mother explained it to me," she said. "She explains things. She says it is better to understand a problem clearly than to be uncertain about it, and more frightened than the situation actually requires." I thought about Sale, whom I had not yet met, whom I was already beginning to understand through the person she had made. I thought about the precision required to be that exact about something that frightening, for the benefit of a child 8 years old, in a transit waiting room on a cold relay moon at the edge of the compact's operational range. "The Relocation Authority's re-verification process," I said, "has a dispute provision. It's in the Station Operations Framework, the full version, not the summary posted on Level 5. Section 7, Subclause 19. If the applicant can demonstrate that the biometric variance between the original filing and the flagged scan is attributable to documented environmental factors, atmospheric composition changes between transit platforms, for instance, or a recorded skin surface response to non-standard transit compartment atmosphere, the hold can be converted to a conditional clearance. Instead of a full re-verification cycle, which takes weeks, the applicant provides a secondary biological attestation from a compact-registered medical officer. The attestation confirms current biometric normalization. Conditional clearance can be granted the same day." Miv looked at me. "Can that be demonstrated?" she said. Her voice was steady, but the gill markings at her throat had brightened slightly. "The provision transit compartments on staging platforms operating at edge of range run a slightly different atmospheric mix than standard compact Class 1 transit," I said. "The variance is within compact tolerance, which is why it's permitted, but it has a documented effect on certain species' biometric surface markers. The effect is temporary. It normalizes within 20 to 25 days in standard atmosphere." I paused. "Your mother has been at Velketh for 16 days. Velketh runs standard atmosphere." Miv did not say anything. She sat very still with her hand flat on the survey. "The normalization window," she said at last, "does it operate in both directions? If she has normalized, does that mean a new biometric scan would now match the authorization file?" "Yes," I said. "Or it means we build the argument that the original authorization file reading was the accurate one, the intake scan was the anomaly, and the re-verification is confirming the original rather than contradicting it. The atmospheric variance documentation supports both readings simultaneously. Either way, the dispute provision gives us a legal instrument to challenge the hold." I heard myself say us, and I did not correct it because it was accurate. "Will you help?" she said. "Yes," I said. She nodded once, the way she nodded when she had received information correctly and filed it in the right place. She did not say thank you. I would later understand that thank you for Miv was something she held back for the completion of a thing, for the moment when it was done, and she could give it the precise weight it had earned. "Then I will check the Vethsoral drainage survey while you begin," she said, and went back to the flat file cabinet. She came every morning at 6th bell. Sometimes she arrived before me. On those mornings I would find her on the floor outside the door with a piece of paper in her lap, adding to whatever she had been working on in the transit waiting area during the night cycle. She was a light sleeper, she told me once flatly, as though this were a piece of environmental data rather than a complaint. The waiting area was noisy after the second watch rotation. She used the time. Sometimes I beat her by 20 minutes and found myself watching the door for her, which I noted with the same precision I applied to everything else, and decided not to examine more closely than necessary. She never asked what I was doing when she arrived. She would observe for a while, with the focused attention she gave to any new process, and when she had gathered enough information, she would make an observation or return to whatever she was working on. She had opinions about the station maps. She had strong opinions about the Vethsoral survey specifically, which she had memorized by day 3 to a degree that allowed her to identify what she was fairly certain was a cartographic error in the representation of the Eastern Canyon's secondary drainage channel. "This line," she said on the morning of day 4, standing at the flat file cabinet with the survey unfolded and her finger on the drainage indicator. "It implies the secondary drainage runs northeast before it joins the main channel at the delta approach. But if the plateau geology is what the reference notes say it is, the rock type, the fracture pattern, the drainage should run northwest. Northeast would require the channel to cut upslope for about 800 meters before descending. That is not how water works." I came and looked over her shoulder. She was right. The drainage representation was based on a survey from the original settlement filing period, before a geological reassessment of the plateau had revised the classification of the rock formation. The updated geological data implied northwest. The updated drainage survey had apparently never been commissioned. "I'll file a correction request with the archive office," I said. "You should," she said. "And the elevation inset on the delta section has the bridge position wrong by approximately 40 meters downstream. The contours say the canyon mouth narrows there, but the bridge is marked where the canyon is still wide enough that the span would be impractical. It should be here." She moved her finger 40 millimeters along the survey. I looked. She was right about that too. "I'll file both," I said. "Good," she said, and went back to the secondary table, where she had been working on a supplemental notation for the level 3 column filing I had submitted 2 days prior. I filed the corrections before midday. The survey archive office sent automated acknowledgement within 40 minutes. The relocation authority on level 5 had, as of that morning, still not responded to Sale's third inquiry. The case file was growing. I had pulled the atmospheric composition records for the edge-of-range staging platform from the Compact Transit Authority's published maintenance logs. These were public documents. Anyone could find them if they knew to look. I had sourced 4 published studies on biometric surface variants in species with dermal photoreceptive or bioluminescent markers under extended exposure to non-standard atmospheric composition. 2 of the studies were relevant in general terms. One was directly on point, a compact medical research bulletin, 11 years old, that had documented exactly the variance pattern we needed in exactly the species category that included Sevrathi biometrics. I had pulled the relocation authority's case file archive, which was accessible to station staff through the internal records system, and identified 6 prior Velketh cases where subclause 19 had been successfully invoked. The relocation authority had resolved all 6 in favor of the applicant. In 4 of those 6 cases, the resolution had come within 8 hours of formal dispute filing. The file was good. What I still needed was the biological attestation from a compact registered medical officer. This had to come from the station medical annex, which had one such officer, Dr. Veth Oren, a compact-built man of about 55 who had been stationed at Velketh for 4 years and who I had spoken to approximately twice, both times in passing. I sent a message to the annex requesting an appointment. I attached the case summary, 3 pages, clearly organized, with the subclause 19 framework and the prior resolution cases in an appendix. He read it, or at least he read enough of it to understand what was being asked, because he scheduled the appointment for the following morning, and his reply said, briefly, "Bring the mother." On the morning of day 7, I walked to the transit waiting area before 6th bell to find Miv. She was already in the corridor outside my office. "There is a medical appointment this morning," I said, "for your mother, for the attestation." "I know," she said. "You sent the appointment notification through the station system. My mother's contact registration is in the station system. She received it at 4th bell. She could not sleep anyway." "You'll both come?" "Yes," she said. Sale was waiting at the transit waiting area entrance. I had a clear impression of her before she saw me. She was standing with her back to the corridor wall, which gave her sight lines in 3 directions, and she was very still in the way of someone who has been standing carefully for a long time and has learned to conserve energy within it. She was taller than I had expected, which was to say I had not expected anything specific, and now I was making a rapid adjustment. Same pale gray-green skin as Miv, but a deeper tone, the deeper coloration of someone who had spent longer in harder conditions. Same points at the tops of her ears. The gill markings at her throat were quiet, which I had learned from watching Miv meant that she was controlled, not that she was calm. She looked at me with the same evaluating attention Miv used. I could see exactly where Miv had learned it. "The cartography technician," she said. "Joven Cal," I said. She looked at Miv, who had materialized at her elbow. Then she looked back at me. "My daughter says you know the provision." "I know the provision," I said. "And I have the case file to support it. The appointment this morning is for the attestation, the last piece. After that, we file." She studied me for another moment. Whatever she was looking for, she either found it or decided it was not there in a way that was acceptable. "Then let us go," she said. Dr. Oren's medical annex was on level 2, past the station's water processing station, and down a corridor that always smelled faintly of the compound they used to seal the wall joins. He was a compact man with careful hands, and the look of someone who had seen enough that surprises had to work fairly hard to register. He read the case summary again, the physical copy I had brought, 3 pages with the appendix, while Sale sat in the examination chair and Miv stood against the wall and I stood near the door. "Atmospheric variance, dermal biometric markers," he said, more to the document than to any of us. "I've seen this before. Not here, previous posting. Same category of problem." "The Compact Medical Research Bulletin," I said. 11 years old. "I know the one," he said. He set the document down and began his equipment check. "Let's see what we're working with." He scanned Sale's left palm. He compared the reading to the intake scan, which I had obtained a copy of from the Transit Records office. He compared both against the authorization file reading. He did all of this without speaking. He did it a second time with a different calibration on the scanner. He set the scanner down and stood looking at the 3 readings on his display for about 90 seconds. "Normalization is complete," he said. "The current reading matches the authorization file to within the standard tolerance band. The intake scan was the anomaly, specifically variance in the secondary dermal layer consistent with extended exposure to below standard oxygen partial pressure." He pulled up the bulletin on his reference screen. "Here. Page 6, figure 3. He looked at it, he looked at Sale's readings. He nodded once. He wrote the attestation by hand in the clinical register's formal notation, 1 page precise, with the specific bulletin reference and the specific variance measurements, and the specific conclusion in the language subclause 19 required. He signed it. He sent it to the annex's supervising administrator for countersignature. The countersignature came back in 11 minutes. He handed me the physical copy. "Good case," he said. "She found the provision," I said, and glanced toward Miv. Dr. Oren looked at Miv. She looked back at him with the even, steady regard she gave everyone who was not yet established as competent or otherwise. "How old are you?" he said. 8, she said. He nodded slowly. The way you nod when the situation has produced an outcome, you have no adequate framework for, but which you want to acknowledge has happened. 8, he said again, to no one in particular, and began the record filing sequence. On day 9, Sale came to the cartography office. She came at 6th bell, which was earlier than I had seen any adult arrive unannounced, and she stood in the doorway in the way of someone who is not certain of her welcome. Miv was already at the secondary table, annotating a terrain overlay I had asked her to check, the Level 7 survey of the Velketh Plateau edge, which had been filed under 3 different reference numbers at different points in the station's history and needed a consolidation notation. Sale looked at the office. She looked at Miv, she looked at me. You are the one who is helping, she said, not a question. Your daughter found the provision, I said. I'm assembling the case package. Sale looked at Miv again. I told you not to bother people, she said. He is not bothered, Miv said, without looking up from the overlay. Sale pressed her lips together. She was deciding, I thought, whether to dispute this on principle or accept it as an accurate reading. He is not bothered, I confirmed. She came in. She sat in the chair I kept for formal survey disputes, across from my table. She folded her hands on her knees with the precision of someone holding themselves together from the inside out. What are our chances? She said. I told her everything. The atmospheric variance documentation and its match to the compact bulletin, Dr. Oren's attestation and what it said, and why it said what the provision required, the 6 prior cases and their resolution timelines, the formal structure of the dispute package and the elements it needed to meet. I told her all of it in order, the way I would present a survey analysis, not softening the uncertainties, not inflating the confidence either. She listened the way Miv listened, completely, with her eyes on me rather than on the air at the side of my head, without interrupting except once, when she asked a clarifying question about the resolution timeline for the 6 prior cases that showed she had understood exactly what I had said and was working out the downstream implications. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? She said. A signed authorization for the medical attestation to be included in the dispute package under your name, I said, and a statement, your own account of the original filing circumstances, the staging platform, the transit conditions, anything you experienced in the compartment that you can describe, and any documentation you retained from the transit authority at the platform. If you have a departure manifest or an atmospheric disclosure, staging platforms are required to provide one at departure. That is the strongest supporting element. I have the disclosure, she said. I have everything. I keep all of it. She said this matter-of-factly as a simple statement of practice. I was told once that in transit you keep everything because you never know which document will matter and which will not. I have kept everything since I was 22. That is exactly the right habit, I said. She looked at me steadily for a moment. Miv told me you said something like that, she said, about explaining problems clearly so the fear does not grow larger than the situation actually requires. I said her mother's approach was a good one, I said. I meant it. She held my look for another moment and then she said, quietly and without particular weight, she has been different since she started coming here, since she found something she could do. She paused. She does not manage uncertainty well when she cannot measure it. When there is nothing to measure, she imagines measurements and they are always worse than the thing itself. Here there was something to measure, I said. Yes. Sale looked at her daughter, who had not looked up from the overlay but whose annotating pace had slowed. She also found the map. She found it the first night, I said. She knew exactly what she was looking for. Sale was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile and not quite something else. Her father used to say that about her, she said, that she always knew what she was looking for, that the only problem was the rest of the world did not file things to her specification. I understand that difficulty, I said. We worked through her statement together. It took just over an hour. She was precise, thorough in the right direction. She remembered not just what had happened at the staging platform, but the specific wording of documents she had signed, the specific sequence of the transit processing, the atmospheric disclosure's exact notation about the compartment mix. She had the disclosure with her. She produced it from a flat document envelope inside her bag, a worn envelope, the kind that gets worn from being handled often, from being checked. That document, as I had hoped, was the final structural support the case package needed. I had 41 documents by the end of that morning. I did not file the package immediately. I spent day 10 and day 11 reviewing it, checking the cross-references, verifying that every element of subclause 19 was addressed explicitly rather than implicitly. This was the part of the work I was most suited for, not the finding of the provision, which Miv had done, not the attestation, which Dr. Oren had done, not the statement which Sale had provided, but the assembly and verification, making certain that the argument was airtight before it was made. Miv helped. I did not ask her to. I simply spread the documents across the secondary table on day 10, and she looked at them for a few minutes and then started checking the annexation structure. On day 11, she found 3 errors, 2 cross-referencing annotations where I had cited the wrong document index number, and a pagination inconsistency in the appendix where 2 pages had been numbered in the wrong order. 3 errors, she said, setting the corrected stack in front of me. I had counted 2, I said. The pagination is separate from the indexing, she said. They are different types of error and should be counted separately. You're right, I said. I corrected all 3. On day 12 of the 14-day window, I filed the dispute package. The Relocation Authority's Level 5 office had a formal response turnaround of between 4 hours and 3 working days for dispute packages filed under Subclause 19. I had told Miv this the morning I filed. What is the actual average, she said. Not the formal window, the actual average. For complete packages with full attestation and prior case precedent documentation, I said. The case file average at stations with active Relocation Authority offices is about 6 hours. She considered this. Then we will probably know today. Probably, I said. She went back to the secondary table. I watched her for a moment without quite intending to. She had her finger on the Veth-Sorrel survey's river contour, and she was tracing it the same way she had on the first night. From the bend at the plateau edge, through the canyon's curve, to the delta where the root dye vats were. At the 6th hour and 22 minutes after filing, the automated notification arrived on my station board. I read it. I read it a second time because I had read the first quickly and wanted to be certain. Miv, I said. She looked up. She had learned, over 12 days, the exact range of tones I used when speaking, and she could distinguish between the tone of procedural information and the tone of something that required her full attention. She gave me her full attention. Conditional clearance granted, I said. The biometric hold is converted to resolved on grounds of documented environmental variance. Secondary biological attestation accepted as sufficient under Subclause 19. Transit clearance reinstated. Departure processing opens tomorrow morning at 6th bell. She did not move for a moment. She sat very still with her hand flat on the delta section of the survey. Then she said to the survey rather than to me, "We can go." "Yes," I said, "you can go." She lifted her hand from the survey. She folded it along its existing creases, carefully, precisely, smoothing each fold before moving to the next. She set it in the center of the secondary table where she had been sitting for 12 mornings. Then she did something she had not done once in 12 days. She started to cry. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, with the particular quality of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has been given, finally, permission to set it down. The gill markings at her throat went very bright and then very dim in rapid succession, as though they were trying to find their resting state and couldn't immediately locate it. She put both hands flat on the table and breathed carefully until they steadied. I did not go to her. I did not speak. I stayed at my table because I understood by now how she worked. She did not need intervention. She needed room to complete a process without being observed or redirected. I looked at the notification on my board, which I had already read twice and did not need to read again, but which gave me somewhere to direct my attention. After about 2 minutes, she stopped. She wiped her face once with the back of her hand. She straightened in her chair with the same deliberate posture she used when she was filing a conclusion. "I should tell my mother," she said. "I'll walk with you," I said. We walked to the transit waiting area together. Sale was in the seat near the window. I realized, walking toward her, that it was the same seat she had occupied every time Miv had mentioned her in the past 12 days. It had a view of the entrance and the corridor that led to the Level 5 Relocation Authority office. She had positioned herself to see any messenger coming from either direction. She saw us from 15 meters. She was on her feet by the time we reached her. I gave her the notification as a print copy. I had printed it the moment after reading it the second time. She read it. She read it a second time slowly, her eyes moving line by line. Then she folded it and held it in both hands against her chest. The gill markings at her throat went very bright and stayed there. She said something in Sevrathi. I did not have standard for it. Whatever it meant, the way it sounded was enough. Then she looked at me and said, "Thank you." 2 words placed with the same precision Miv used, held back for the completed thing, given to it with the weight it had earned. "Your daughter found the provision," I said. "She also found 3 errors in the annex that I had missed." Sale looked at Miv. Miv looked at me. 3, she confirmed. "You said 2 earlier. I want it on the record correctly." 3, I said. "I stand corrected." Sale looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she put her hand on Miv's shoulder, not dramatically, just a hand resting there, the way you rest a hand somewhere that is exactly where it should be. The departure processing took most of the following morning. I spent it in the office doing the routine work I had been doing around the edges of the case file for 14 days and had not always attended to as carefully as I should have. The secondary table was empty. The Vethsoral survey was where Miv had folded and placed it the day before. I filed the Level 3 column notation, which had been sitting in my outbox for 10 days waiting for me to complete the supplemental diagram Miv had drawn. I filed the Vethsoral drainage correction, both the eastern secondary channel error and the bridge position error she had identified. I filed the plateau elevation consolidation notation for the 3 reference number survey. I filed the Level 7 plateau edge correction. 4 filings that had been waiting, all of which Miv had either identified or worked on. All in one morning, because the secondary table was empty and I had the time. At the 14th bell, I heard a knock on the door frame. Miv was standing in it with her transit coat on, the same slightly too large one, the same worn strap bag over one shoulder. The bag was heavier than it had been when I had first seen it. The outer flat pocket, the one that could hold a folded survey, was full. "Departure is at the 16th bell," she said. "I came to return this." She reached into the flat pocket and took out the folded Vethsoral survey. She held it out. "Keep it," I said. "I'll print another." She looked at the survey in her hands. She looked at me. I waited, because I had learned how she processed offers, not quickly, but correctly. "I will put it on the wall," she said finally, "when we have a wall to put it on." "That's a good use for a map," I said. She tucked the survey back into the flat pocket of her bag and pressed the closure down with more care than strictly necessary. Then she looked up at me. She had the expression I had seen once or twice over 12 days, not the accounting assessment, not the working attention she gave a problem, but something quieter than either of those. more direct, the expression of someone who has decided to ask the question they have been holding. "What are you looking for, human?" she said. I had not expected the question. I sat with it for a moment, not because I did not have an answer, but because I wanted to give it the precision it deserved, which was the courtesy she extended to everything. "What do you mean?" I said. "You helped us," she said. 14 days. The case file was 41 documents. You did not have to do any of it. I would like to know what you were looking for." I thought about it honestly. I thought about Third Bell and the open drawer and a child tracing a river with her finger in the moment before she knew anyone was watching. I thought about the way she had said that is the right one and the weight of 16 days of waiting that was behind that sentence. I thought about the 6 prior cases and the attestation and the 3 errors I had missed in the annexes. I thought about what it had been to come to the office at 6th bell for 12 days and find the secondary table occupied. "You," I said. I smiled, because that was what happened when I was being fully precise rather than approximately precise. I was looking for exactly this. She looked at me. Then she laughed. It was not a long laugh. It was not the unguarded laugh of a child who has been at ease for a long time. It was a short, surprised, genuine sound, the kind that escapes before you have time to evaluate whether to allow it, and the gill markings at her throat went very bright. "That is not an accurate answer," she said. "It is the most accurate one I have," I said. She considered this seriously, the way she considered everything. She seemed to reach a conclusion. "All right," she said. "I will accept it under the same provision as the conditional clearance, sufficient on its own terms." "That seems fair," I said. She looked around the office one more time. The flat files, the secondary table, the equipment benches, the print of the Velketh Plateau terrain on the wall above my desk, which she had identified 4 errors in over the course of 12 days, none of which I had filed yet because I had been filing other things. "The plateau print," she said. "There are 4 corrections pending. Don't let them sit too long." "I won't," I said. She nodded once, the filing nod, the one that meant information received and correctly placed. She turned and walked down the corridor toward the departure bay, the survey flat in her bag's outer pocket, her transit coat slightly too large at the shoulders, her footsteps precise, and even on the cold corridor floor. I stayed in the doorway until she turned the corner. "The correction to the Vethsorel Eastern Drainage Channel is in the archive now. Both corrections, the secondary channel and the bridge position, filed that same afternoon, with a notation crediting the identification of each error to an independent cartographic review conducted during a consultation period. I did not put her name on either notation. She was 8 years old, she had no formal role, and I did not want anyone asking questions she was not there to answer. But the corrections are accurate, and the archive holds them, and in the cartographic sense, those 2 things together constitute a kind of record that does not require a name to be real. I filed the level 3 column notation as well. The engineering office sent a crew to verify within 3 days. The column was exactly where MIV had drawn it. They updated the posted schematics the following week. I printed a second copy of the Vethsorel survey the morning after departure. I have it on the wall above the flat file cabinet, where the light from the overhead hits it straight on. The corrected drainage channel is marked in the margin in my own handwriting, and the bridge position has a small annotation pointing to the correct location, and below both corrections I wrote, in smaller letters, "Per independent review." Nobody has asked what that means. I filed the 4 plateau print corrections the day after that. The Survey Archive Office asked, in the covering response, whether I had found an error in the reference dataset, because 4 corrections at once was unusual. I said I had done a comprehensive review during a consultation period. This was accurate. 2 years later, I received a message through the compact resettlement relay system. It had been routed through 2 intermediate stations, which is normal for Veth Sorrel given where it sits. It arrived at my station board at 4th bell, and I read it when I came in at 6th. It was brief. Sevrathi names in the header, transliterated into standard in the relay system's automated format. A Veth Sorrel settlement relay address. The message. The map is on the wall. We have a wall. The river sounds exactly the way my mother said it would. I counted 14 steps from the bridge to our door. The divats are larger than the survey represents. I have corrected the scale in my own copy. I also corrected the secondary drainage channel and the bridge position, but I see from the archive that you already filed those. Good. The eastern canyon in the morning has a color that is not on any map I have seen. I am working on a notation for it. I read it 3 times. I filed it in the cartography office correspondence folder, which is not the correct location for personal communications, but is where I keep things that belong to the work, and also to something that is not entirely captured by the work. And I have not found a category that fits it better than that one. The survey on my wall still has the corrections in the margin. Below them, after I read the message, I added a 3rd line in even smaller handwriting. Scale of Divat complex, under review, independent observation pending. I have not filed the formal correction yet. I am waiting for her measurements. The color of the eastern canyon in the morning, I have decided, can wait for her notation. Whatever color it is, she will find the right word for it. She always knows what she is looking for.